Good evening, everybody. Boy, that's hot. Okay. I'm Mike Shepard. I'm the senior warden here at St. Mark's, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this final installment of our Voices of Reconciliation series. I think most of you have seen the news that we have a new dean, and he sent us a very inspired message a couple of days ago. And it's a great lead into tonight's conversation because among the many lovely things he said, oh my goodness, I'm getting louder. One of the many lovely things that he said, he said, I am the first openly gay dean of St. Mark's Episcopal Cathedral. And he's talked about what that meant for him. And he talked about being young and gay and, in his words, hungry for Jesus. And then he talked about being a member of a church with values that go way back, traditions that go way back, beauty that goes way back. And he said that some of that beauty is tied to a certain sense of nostalgia for the way things used to be. And nostalgia always feels kind of good in a way. But he pointed out that that nostalgia is connected to a reality in the past that wouldn't have allowed him to be a priest in our church, wouldn't have allowed him to be a dean. So that leads me to sort of some of the broader questions that I'm sure our panel are going to get into tonight. What does it mean to be LGBTQIA+ and a Christian? What does it mean to follow Jesus in a world where there are still some very real barriers to acceptance and sometimes violence in the face of folks' identities? So what does it mean to try to incorporate both of those things? And obviously some of us are drawn to the Episcopal Church because there is a pronounced and profound rejection of exclusion, right? All are welcome at God's table. All are welcome in the nave here. All are welcome in our community. We believe it, we live it, and we show it. But nonetheless, some of this is a difficult personal journey, and it's nice to have the backing of a church, but the struggles are real, and they can take a lifetime to sort of sort out. So tonight we are very lucky to be joined by a panel of folks who are going to share openly about their experiences, and we are equally lucky that we have a marvelous facilitator in Andy Stewart here to sort of raise those questions and to give folks the opportunity to share their experiences. So thank you for coming. And Andy, I will turn it over to you for the discussion.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to all of you for joining us. And we are recording this conversation so that those who couldn't brave or didn't want to brave the rush hour traffic can hear what's going to come out in the course of the evening. So this is our final Voices of Reconciliation session of the program year. And those of you who followed the series so far know that during the last months we've had a series of faith and civic leaders join us to talk about their own experiences of struggle and reconciliation. And we've also sought their advice for our community as we ready ourselves for our new pastoral leader. And now we know who that is. And of course, next month we celebrate Twin Cities Pride, which has a very special place in the summer calendar of the cathedral as we extend our hospitality to those who are celebrating Pride across in the park. Our cathedral is known as a place of welcome and acceptance, and I think we are proud of that, and we delight in that. At the same time, we know that these continue to be issues that divide churches. They've divided the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Communion. Even this community, I'm sure, went through many struggles in coming to this point of acceptance and welcome. We also know that welcome and acceptance are all the more genuine and grounded when they flow from understanding the truth of someone's personal journey. These are not sort of generic categories. These are individual people and people who've come to the truth of themselves, often through great struggle. So we frame this conversation, like the others, in terms of reconciliation. And just to introduce a bit of scripture, 2 Corinthians 5, all this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting the message of reconciliation to us. So this is our primary task as Christians, is to extend that reconciliation, won by Christ, to others. We also know that reconciliation is not the result of some formulaic process, like a workshop, an off-site or a retreat for a staff to achieve reconciliation by 4 p.m. But it's a daily, we've all been to those, right? But it's a daily practice of attentiveness and sensitivity to the struggles of others, as well as to the struggles in our own hearts. So this evening, we're doing something a little different. We've asked members of our own congregation to speak about their experiences of being part of or allies to the LGBTQIA+ community. Though given all the letters in that acronym, this is not one community, people. This is obviously a very diverse range of ways of being human, just as diverse and complex as every other way of being human. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and tell us why they're up here. So why were they people we thought of for this conversation? And then as the conversation unfolds, both in what they say about themselves and then in maybe some questions and back and forth, we'll make sure to touch on issues of faith and church, the current social and political moment, and life here at the cathedral. Now I'm up here both as a member of the panel and as the facilitator of the conversation. So I'll go first. And you can see that we have different generations represented here, not simply different experiences of being somewhere in that acronym, but different generations. Well, I'm a Texan. I was born and grew up in Houston, Texas. There's another Texan here. We have an Oklahoman. It's complicated up here in all sorts of ways. So I grew up in the 60s and 70s. My own personal awareness of being gay goes back to 5th grade when I had an enormous crush on a 6th grade soccer player. I remember his name, but I will not reveal it here this evening for the interests of his own privacy, but of course, never seen again. It took another 5 years for me to fully understand what was going on, but since my sophomore year of high school, I've accepted that's me. And to be honest, I never really had difficulty accepting it. It was just a matter of how did you live that in the 1960s, 1970s, 80s, and even today. It's gotten easier in some ways, but not entirely. So I spent the next few years after that sophomore year of high school kind of exploring what that meant for me and figuring out, well, what's this like, having some relationships, the sort of usual messy stuff you do as an adolescent, and then into college. And then I made the unusual decision to join a Benedictine monastery at age 23. And I wasn't running from anything, I wasn't escaping anything. It was a legit sense of vocation and call. And my community, St. John's Abbey, up 94 here, was pretty accepting, or at least tolerant of gay members, as long as you didn't make a fuss about it, and of course, as long as you kept the vow of celibacy, because that was an integral part of the vocation. Despite the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church, which became in some ways stricter during those years with John Paul II and Benedict and so on, I have to say I never felt ashamed or guilty about being gay, and I think this was a great blessing. So perhaps that's a tremendous blind spot in my conscience or something, that I didn't struggle with it, but that's the way it was for me. Well, like many people who take a vow of some kind, I had my struggles and my failures. I loved the monastic life, but I eventually reached the point where I just couldn't do it anymore, given my needs for intimacy, and also the strain of the cognitive dissonance between what I knew to be true about myself, and then what, as a monk and priest, I could say out loud, and what the church claimed to be true. So here I am. I think one more thing I want to say about my generation that's important, and it's an issue that hasn't gone away, but it was particularly acute in that era. Bad things happen when natural attractions are forced underground by custom or by rules. In a culture of clandestine sexuality, a young gay man in the 70s and 80s, like I was pretty highly vulnerable to exploitation and even abuse by pastoral figures. It happened to me as a teenager. This wasn't just a Catholic thing, as we all know. Abuse flourished across the religious spectrum in an era when sexual identity and sexuality itself could not be spoken of or claimed with integrity. And it wasn't just a religious thing either. And of course, it still happens. And it still happens even in churches that are affirming and inclusive. But at least now we can name it for what it is. And that's a lot of progress since the time that I was growing up. So I'll end this little presentation of myself by just thanking you for letting me be in a place where my private self and my public self can finally be together. Who's next?
I'll go. Okay, my name is Abby Howard, and I am the one from Oklahoma, unfortunately. And I'm going next because you kind of intrigued me a bit there, but I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma, was born and raised there, and it's a tiny little town, you know, like a couple thousand people. And there was, I'm sorry? At Vian, V-I-A-N, Vian. And it's, anyways, there was no place for queer anything, you know, that just didn't exist. This 80s and 90s. And that did not exist. Just wasn't a reality there. And I very much put on somebody else's character, right? Like I took my father's identity, my father's box, you know, right, that he made for himself, and I took that and was like, okay, well, I at least know how to do that. I watched him do that, you know, and really stuffed myself inside that box and tried real hard to like be my own person within that box, you know what I mean? Like push the boundaries of that box. And then, so it wasn't, for me, it wasn't until, you know, into my 30s before I ever even decided to step out of that box. You know, I'd built a whole life inside that box, you know. And what are the other things I'm supposed to say? I can't even remember. Oh yes. And so my father was, thank you. So my father was a minister in a charismatic movement, I think Pentecostal. And I grew up, he did a lot of prison ministry stuff as well. He did a thing called A&V, Alcoholics, Narcotics, Victorious. But it was really just a lively Pentecostal service that we would do in different prisons in Oklahoma. And we had a little family band, and I played drums and piano and tambourine when I was a little bitty and sang. First song I ever wrote was, I performed it at the women's prison on the edge of the stage, right? Because like, hi, a little gay kid, you know? But anyways, that particular religion that I grew up in, that version of Christianity, was not accepting at all. You know, it was actually quite the opposite. It was very bashing of anything that wasn't straight, normal, quote-unquote family values, which was a lot of the reason why I'm just going to stay in this box, it's safe here, and continue on with life. And I came to the Episcopal Church probably about 15 years ago, maybe a little more. in Arkansas, where I was living at the time. And there was a wonderful queer community that was in that church, and I just was at home there. And I had a lot of religious trauma from my childhood growing up, so it was difficult to be in, that situation. I was reminded of that when I invited a friend the other day to church, and he was so uncomfortable here because of the religious trauma from his childhood. And I remembered, like, oh yeah, right, that's a thing. But I really have so much thanks and praise for the Episcopal Church in particular, because they helped me through a journey of forgiving myself, of forgiving other folks involved, and really a new way of living, and a new version of myself and in Christianity that has helped to heal those wounds from my childhood. So,
okay. Excuse me. My name's Tracy Jones. I'm from the 60s and 70s as well, maybe a little earlier than his. And when you said, why are we up here? I have absolutely no idea why anybody would ask me to talk on anything, because I have such a bad attitude about stuff. But I'm going to be really nice tonight. I'm going to be really nice, I promise. But I came from a Unitarian Universalist background, which is not a Christian background. And the first time I came to St. Mark's was actually for Pride Mass. Oh gosh, 15 years ago, I think. And then I came the next year for Pride Mass, and I remember thinking, wow, these people really pray a lot, because if you ever go to a Unitarian service, there's no prayer, So I was like, wow, this is really different. But I grew up in a really, really small town as well in South Dakota, and it was not good. It was not good. It was not good from relatives. It was not good. It was just not good. So when I hit Minneapolis, my favorite thing ever was I started working in gay bars. And it was like the biggest epiphany you can imagine. I mean, it was just so much fun when I would think, this disco is holding more people than my whole hometown, So it was great, and I've been coming here, and I mentioned this to Andy once before. In fact, Father Tim just said, I think I'm an Episcopal Unitarian because I'm still not sure if I understand Christianity, and I guess that's a good thing because I question a lot, so I guess that's a good thing. But I actually joined here and came here more to learn about Christianity, but more than that, to learn about Christians. Because, wow, what a difference. I mean, everything from here to here. And I couldn't understand, and I still don't understand 12 years later, how it can be that separated. Until somebody told me once, people hear what they want to hear. And they're going to learn what they want to learn, and they're going to, and I guess that's how come some Christians, to me, can be so not right. I was going to say nasty, but, and then some like us that are cool, So anyhow, that's me.
Okay, my name is Lynette Rainey Grandel, and let's see, a little bit about me. I am here because I'm married to a trans woman. I think that's why I'm here. We both grew up in Duluth. I grew up attending the Episcopal Church, St. Paul's. My spouse is Venus DeMars. Most, if not all of you know her. She's not here. I think she's stuck in traffic somewhere. Anyway, and I don't want to give too much of her story. I'll just say that we're both born in 1960, and so that meant that most of her formative years were spent basically being in hiding from herself. So we became very good friends. Finally, she said, okay, we can date. She didn't want to date anybody because I found out much later she was afraid that people would discover the truth about her, that she really wanted to be a woman. We got married in 1983, and we moved down here to the Twin Cities. I should mention that I stopped going to the Episcopal Church, but I never quit. I just got lazy. When I went to college, I slept in whenever I had the opportunity to, and that included Sunday mornings. I did go to All Saints a couple of times, and when I was back in Duluth, I'd go to St. Paul's, and I came here a couple of times for Easter and stuff like that, just because I was sort of checking things out. There she is, right on cue. And so anyway, she started coming out to me in 1988. And she didn't really know what that was, what being transgender was. And we call the umbrella term back then was transgender. We just started finding our way forward together. She was an artist and a musician, and so she had a lot of opportunity to be creative with her presentation. So for a long time, that sort of allowed her to be who she was, but didn't switch the pronouns until much later and everything else. And I will say that I think probably the reason, should I do the reason I came to St. Mark's? The reason I came to St. Mark's was, I think it had to be 1995. I was teaching at Rochester Community College, commuting from South Minneapolis to Rochester. I was grateful to have a tenure track job at an area community college. That was the closest one I could get, for somebody getting a PhD at the U who wasn't a superstar, who didn't want to move. And people thought I was nuts being grateful to do a 90-minute commute each way. But I was also kind of grateful because I realized I'm not going to run into any of my students at the Gay 90s or all these other places we used to go to on a pretty regular basis so Venus could dress. And so in 1995, she was summoned for jury duty, and was kind of, I think, proud of the fact that you could serve as, in the public sphere doing your civic duty. And I don't know, she came back from the first day and said nothing much happened. It's really boring. It's just like a lot of hanging around and waiting for nothing to happen. And then the next morning, a friend of ours called us up, and it was, I don't know, maybe 8:30, something like that in the morning. He said, you got to turn on the radio. It was KQRS. He said, they're making fun of you. And somehow or other, we hadn't realized there had been a reporter in the room, and after Venus had left for being interviewed to be on a jury, one of the lawyers, the prosecuting lawyer, wanted her the other way around. Wanted Venus to be on the jury, and the prosecuting lawyer said no. And the judge had to make a decision as to whether someone who, she wasn't wearing a dress, she was wearing pants and a woman's blazer, and she's made up probably less so than she is right now. But anyway, they were confused by her appearance enough to try to figure out if she was a protected class or could she be stricken from the jury because she would be prejudiced, I think, in favor of the defendant. And the judge made a ruling. There happened to be a reporter in the room, and so that person wrote everything up and put it as a headline on page 3 of the Star Tribune, all the way across the front page. My name wasn't in there, but Venus's legal name then was in there, and it said she was married to a college professor. Anybody who knew my last name would have easily put it together. I didn't have tenure yet. I was freaked out, and the shock jocks were making fun of this story. They were making it sound like somebody had dressed up like a character from Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, to get out of jury duty. So that's what they were joking about. So anyway, I did what I do oftentimes when I'm nervous. I go to a thrift store and start shopping. It was back when Steeple People was at the intersection of Lyndale and Franklin Avenue, and I was sifting through stuff in the basement, and there was this old Native American guy down there. He'd gotten a ride there from the veterans home, and he started talking to me. His name was Ira Saylor. And his family, I guess, was really involved in the Episcopal Church up on White Earth. He'd gone to, what's the name of the, Shattuck? He'd gone to Shattuck, in Faribault, yeah. And then apparently was allowed to practice on the organ here, all kinds of stuff. But he talked about St. Mark's and people who attended St. Mark's a lot. They sounded like interesting characters, and he really was presenting them as characters, not necessarily nice people, but just like fun to observe, right? And so, and then he had to leave, and we said our farewells, and I thought about it, and I thought, I've been really upset because it feels like I'm surrounded by hatred right now. I need to go to a place where people are told to love one another. So I'm going to check out St. Mark's. And so I came here, sat at the back, didn't want anybody to talk to me. Of course, they started talking to me, and pretty soon I was an usher and everything else. So that's as far as I'll go with that story.
There we go. Oh, yeah, that works. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul. Yeah, why am I here? I don't know. So I moved here about a bit less than 2 years ago for law school. I'm also from Texas originally. I'm from Dallas, which is way better than Houston. Smells a lot better. There's a lot less fish and all there. Way better place to be. It's also a lot better than Oklahoma. As I was telling Abby earlier, the reason why why Texas doesn't fall off into the Gulf of Mexico is because Oklahoma sucks. So glad to be up here now that we've covered all of those bases. Yeah, no, we're really unloading all this after that, wonderful, touching story. But yeah, I mostly grew up in Kansas City. I grew up in the Episcopal Church. I am a couple decades younger than most of my comrades up here, and so I've had a bit of a different relationship with church and faith and all that by that token. Mostly just because, much like Andy, I never had any problem with accepting myself, and then on top of that, my parents never had really, or if they had trouble, they didn't tell me, so God bless them. But I've never had any real kind of trouble reckoning with myself or my identity, whether within myself or within the kind of more major parts of my actual real lived life, which I think is a bit different than a lot of the other folks up here, and is a real blessing, and something I'm super thankful for. And kind of like what you were saying, how you don't have the experience of the wrestling with the inner guilt or whatever on the inside. I don't only not have that within myself, but also just within the church. So definitely a bit of a different experience there. I would actually say that if there's anything that I've had to wrestle with more so, it's we've touched a little bit on some of the idea of religious trauma and stuff that can be really prevalent in our huge massive umbrella LGBT group, and then also within all those smaller sub-communities to varying degrees, can have a lot of trouble. Oh gosh, I had a train of thought that I totally left the station. No, oh my gosh, choo-choo, right? It went right by. It ran me over. It really did. It just ran me. I got my mouth going, and when my mouth goes, it just keeps on talking is the problem. Religious trauma, right? Yeah. So I never really had much of that. I've had plenty of folks who I've met within the queer community where I have trouble talking to them about my faith, about my relationship with my faith, because I'm blessed to have a super healthy relationship, And a lot of people didn't have that same experience, and it can be really, really tough to even broach the subject with those people. And this is a really central part of my life. You know, I'm here, you know, during a regular year when it's not like, you know, law school finals, I'm also singing up to the choir. So I'm not, so you know, I mean, I'm here a plenty and everything. And yeah, no, it can be kind of tough to tell people, oh yeah, like, no, I don't want my plans to go super late on Saturday night because I need to be up and I need to, you know, have my beauty sleep and make sure that my little instrument inside of my throat is working just fine, right? So that's, if I've had any kind of like odd spaces of friction, believe it or not, that's almost more where I've had trouble navigating and everything. And then also it's definitely pretty disconcerting in terms of if we're talking about just general acceptance and accepting yourself and everything, because like, for the first time in my life, I've ever, you know, kind of felt like stuff has started going downhill a little bit, to the point at which we're like, you know, we said at the beginning, like, this is getting recorded, and like, you know, I would have run off stage if I'd had an actual issue with it, but you know, a part of me is just kind of like, you know, how much do I love having this be my internet presence right now in the particular world we live in, especially with this huge kind of, you know, microscope on top of Minneapolis specifically. It's, so in some ways I'm almost, yeah, now as I'm kind of talking and monologuing and therapizing a bit, you know, as we often do, like it's almost been a bit of like the reverse experience that maybe some of these folks up here that have had, you know, it's like, you know, able to kind of grow up and grow into this identity and finally be able to express yourself and be more comfortable, whereas I've almost had a bit of the opposite experience in some ways. So, yeah, I'm Paul, it's nice to meet you all.
All right. I'm Deb Thorpe. I've been here since the early 2000s. I did not grow up an Episcopalian. I'm going to put the public service announcement out here first. I'm here in my own capacity, my job as a strong ally in the trans and gender diverse community, as a medical director. That's separate from here. And my employer says every time I go to speak somewhere, I have to say that. So here I did. Good job, yeah. My wife and I were looking for a church that would accept us. In 1997, we were planning a wedding, and no, it wasn't going to be something that you could go down to the courthouse and get a marriage license and get the judge to marry you. But we were planning a wedding. I had never been married before. And we went to the church where she was raising her kids, and they said, absolutely not. We will not marry you. And oh, by the way, you can't teach Sunday school anymore. And so I went to my uncle, who's a Catholic priest. And I said, Uncle Bill, will you marry me and Kathy? And he said, I can't. Only he didn't have the guts to tell me himself. He had to go through my mother, his sister. And I said, well, you're coming to the wedding anyway, right? And he couldn't do that. And it was 1998 when this was all going down, when we finally got married. And the husband of one of my OBGYN partners was a Methodist minister, and he said, I will do this. He didn't have a parish at the time. He was a stay-at-home dad. So it was a little easier for him to do that. So we weren't churched for a long time. And then Gene Robinson was ordained a bishop, and an openly gay bishop. And we looked at each other and we said, I think we found a church where we might be accepted. And at the time we were living in the North Loop, and we came across Loring Park, and I have been here ever since. She has too, but she is down in the columbarium. And this parish stood by us as we unfortunately ended up getting divorced. And I will never forget how they stood by both of us separately. Kathy had malignant melanoma that went to her brain, and she had a dramatic personality transformation, and it was very hard. And Siri, God bless her, had let me have my own service with my friends and my support system. And so I will always be at St. Mark's. To go back, I will tell you, coming out was not hard. All of a sudden, the light bulb went on, and I went, oh, that's been the problem for the last 10 years. I was so buried in schoolwork and being a rebellious adolescent, I hadn't paid any attention to the fact that I did not want to date any boys. And I came out in med school, and it was just normal. It's just been normal. My family accepted me because I was raised in a very liberal Catholic environment. And my uncle, the Catholic priest, who I love dearly and who I take care of now, regrets not coming to the wedding. But his bishop wouldn't let him attend, wouldn't give him the Sunday off. And I didn't know that, and he didn't tell me. You know, he would have had to drive down on a Saturday, and he couldn't have made it back for Saturday night Mass because that's what Catholics do, right? So he couldn't do it. My mother had a hard time. My parents had a hard time. They were like, God doesn't make mistakes. God says love everybody, and so we love you, but you can't be in a relationship, and we don't want that for you. You were supposed to be, what the Catholic Church apparently taught was being gay wasn't so bad. It was horrible, but it wasn't so bad if you were just celibate for your whole life. And that wasn't me. I wasn't going to do that. And there were some other little things with the Catholic Church that made me not want to go back there. The fact that there were no women priests, priests couldn't get married, just a few things that even as a I was a rebel enough that I refused to get confirmed. So I never did that. So it has been helpful. There's a book called Separation of Church and Hate by John Fugelsang that has actually been very helpful in coming up with being a Christian in a good way, as Tracy puts it, versus being a Christian elsewhere. And I'll give credit to our book club for choosing that. And it really opened my eyes. I loved that book. And it gave me a lot of stuff to be able to talk to patients about, because they come in and sometimes my patients would not be entirely comfortable. And it was helpful to have some spiritual, argumentative fodder for the stuff that they had been told. And that was helpful. So I went around in a big circle here. That does bring me back to present day, and I'll just be quiet now because I already took up all of my time and everybody else's.
Wow, thanks all of you. I don't know if we've woven a tapestry or have a lot of loose threads, but maybe we can pull on a couple of them in the time that we have left. Tracy, I wonder if I could pick on you first, because we're roughly contemporaries, although you always remind me you're older, considerably older, perhaps. So we were gay men of this, more or less this, yeah. So we were gay men of more or less the same generation, which of course was the AIDS generation. Right. And I was at a distance from it because I was in a monastery, and at least at that point I was behaving myself. And I certainly had friends who were affected and friends who contracted HIV and so on, but it wasn't nearly the same as the experience you had because you were on the front lines. And here you are, and I know we've talked a bit about this, but is there a word to like Paul's generation and others that you want to say about what that has meant in the history of the gay community?
I think when I think of AIDS, my father was in World War II, and one time we were talking, and I lost a lot of friends to the AIDS crisis, a lot, because I was working in a bar. All my friends were the party people, you know. I always say that I survived it simply because I have a big mouth and will never let it be forgotten what we had to go through. There was an old saying about you went to a funeral in the morning, you held the hands of your friends in the afternoon, and then you went dancing at night because, I'm gonna get teary-eyed, because you had to dance, you had to live. It was, to the younger people that didn't have to go through that, I am so pleased you don't have to go through that, because it was like World War II. We were losing people left and right. I worked at the saloon back then. For some of you people that don't know the saloon, I think everybody does, but for some of you, I mean, back then it was like the hot spot to be. And we used to have a blackboard where people would write the names of their friends that died. And then on Sunday night at the end of the shift, we would wipe it off, and then you would start over on Monday. I was telling these guys, AZT was a drug back then. I don't think it was worthwhile, but whatever. People couldn't afford it because they didn't have insurance. So we had a special table in the back where the guys that could afford it would split it with the guys that couldn't afford it. And I don't know about anybody, some of you didn't ever have to come out to your parents, but can you imagine, if you are a parent, can you imagine your son coming home and saying, I'm gay, and by the way, I'm dying? And how many of our customers would come back 2 weeks later and say they got kicked out? We had to put a hazmat suit on to go to visit anybody at HCMC. Most of my friends were at HCMC anyhow. Yeah, so you're just so lucky you don't have to deal with that. So that's my AIDS story.
As a quick aside to that, just because I am the token young person up here, one of the things that actually it always pulls at my strings a little bit whenever I hear somebody who's actually lived through it. And there are kind of two big things. One is that, like, because so many people did die during them, we kind of lost a huge kind of generation of older gay men who, like, you know, would be passing down, like, just institutional knowledge to us, right? Like, there's this huge gap in kind of our collective cultural experience within the gay community. And then also just like the actual horrors of of that disease and what it looked like back then and like the lack of treatment and everything, completely foreign to us. Like PrEP came out like when I was in college. Like, so like when I say like I the way I describe kind of, I was born around 1998, so we can go ahead and we can all date ourselves now, right? So like I was, what's it called? So I was born in 98. By the time it kind of got to be inappropriate for you to be calling somebody gay on the playground or whatever during school, that's around when, you know, gay marriage started becoming more and more accepted or maybe even legalized, right? Then by the time you get to college, stuff like PrEP comes out and you're all of a sudden a lot more safer if you are sexually active, right? So like, as I have gotten older, like the gay rights things have kind of come along with it in this way that has been very insulating, honestly, for me and a lot of other people my age. And I think that really it hasn't been until I've gotten older and I've had like just different experiences with people dying and stuff, and kind of the kind of experience of like mortality and stuff, that I've even like gotten to even get a little bit close to anything what any of that has been like. And I think that that is a huge shame to people my generation, honestly. You know, it's like I think that there's like this kind of weird kind of distance or isolation, this kind of like, what word do I use? This kind of, yeah, I don't know. There's a bit of a gap that I think has definitely been fostered more so by the people that are about my age, in terms of like kind of, we are comfortable, we're happy, we're safe, we know what it is to be ourselves and to be in our bodies and everything, and like, you know, like why would we need to be connected to a community, whereas like a lot of the broader LGBT community is a community because there were all these issues that people had to be fighting against for so long. And now, you know, we're, like I said earlier, I don't want to get too doomerism, and I know we all already had to do kind of like a little disclaimer, this is not related to my job kind of a thing, but no, I mean, things are getting different again. And it would really suck for things to backtrack in a really dangerous, bad way, yeah.
One thing about our age is, I do remember in 1978, my first gay pride event in Minneapolis. We met at Lake Calhoun, I don't know the name of it now. Yeah, that one. And we marched, from that lake to Loring Park. Okay. And I remember somebody counted, now remember this is 1978, and there were 248 gay men marching, and we just thought that was such a huge number. And there was one not very talented drag queen singing "We Are Family" over and over and over, and that was the entertainment. She was also a bus driver. So that was 78.
So I just want to loop back to, Paul, something you said earlier, and you touched on it just again now. If we were having this conversation 5 years ago, it might have been a different atmosphere when things seem to be getting better. But they're not. And so I think a question that all of us need, whether because we identify with anything represented here, or simply because we're concerned citizens, where and how do we find hope? And how does that connect to our own journey of faith and our mission of reconciliation that I opened with that quote from 2 Corinthians? So if you have an answer to that, please tell me, because I need all the help I can get too.
I think he said it perfect, though. That's my hope, is that you don't have to experience what we had to experience. And I get hope in, like, when I'm hanging out with my 13-year-old grandnephew, and he doesn't even think twice about GLBT. He doesn't anything. He could care less, which is another story. But so that's where my hope is coming from.
I'm going to add something, because especially the trans community is really, you know, we've, Venus and I have been talking for the last year or more about, you know, what are the signs that mean we'll have to move to another country, and will we be able to? I was calmed down through a conversation with a friend of mine who's been researching this for about a year now on behalf of her 20-some children. One is trans and one is non-gender conforming. And she said, you know, Thunder Bay is only 5 hours away. Just get in the car and drive if you need to. So having various plans, knowing people in foreign countries, I keep on watching various bills and various votes and various judicial decisions, and sometimes it goes this way and sometimes it goes that way. But to speak to, Paul, what you were saying earlier about realizing that a lot of the elders are missing who could be guiding the younger community. The trans community has been around long enough so there are lots of elders who've been through worse times and lived in a time when there weren't any rights and know how to survive. And so I guess that gives me hope as well. And in terms of what everybody here can be doing, you know, just be welcoming, just be sympathetic, pay attention to the news. Don't be surprised when I tell you I can't travel to England anymore because my spouse can't legally use a bathroom. So, you know, just pay attention to these things and let your friends know, let everybody know how critical these times are for a lot of people in the community.
I have none. I have no hope. That's not a joke. I mean, it's okay that you laughed, but it's not. And I just came, yeah, it's on. I just came back from Arkansas. My kids are in Arkansas. And I walked, I was downtown and was going to meet a friend who I hadn't seen in a long time, and I walked maybe 4 blocks and was, you know, I'm not even dressed up. I'm not even, you know, like, I ain't even trying, you know, and was called slurs 3 different times by 3 different groups of people in a 4-block radius, you know. I mean, thank God. I mean, I'm in Minneapolis because of it, you know. Like, I'm here because at some point it was hard on my children, you know. And why would I put them through that? You know what I mean? They didn't ask for that, you know. So, like, I'm here because I'm escaping the South, you know. And when I go back to visit, it's not to say there's not good people there. Of course there's good people there, you know. But it's rough out there, you know. Sorry.
What gives me hope is I live in Minnesota, and Minnesota put sexual orientation and gender identity into the protected class in 1993. And I don't think it's going to go back. I really don't, despite everything that's going on in all of the states all around us. But I remember when it wasn't, none of the care that I would provide my patients was covered by insurance, and they were splitting their doses and not feeling safe in the world. And now I see this back again. And maybe I'm old enough to know that the pendulum swings and then it swings back, but there are days when I don't have a lot of hope for my patients, not so much for, I'm not worried about me. I'm not worried about me. I worry about my patients.
We have a hard stop, and so we need to vacate this space for rehearsal. But we've arranged to gather in the Heritage Room for people who'd like to continue conversation and have a bit of refreshment. I think I'll just close by saying what gives me hope is that we can sit in this holy place and have a conversation like this. That's pretty amazing. So a word of hope and of gratitude. And thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. Okay.